Well, again, good afternoon and welcome everyone to this Q&A session with Donald Romanik on what everyone should know about vestry service. My name is Brendan Hunter. I'm a program director at the Episcopal Church Foundation and delighted to have you with us this afternoon. Just a quick word about ECF for those of you who may not be familiar with us. Our mission is to strengthen the strategic, leadership, and financial capabilities of congregations, dioceses, and other organizations such as camps and conference centers, religious orders, and other Episcopal entities. We do this through a variety of programs, including capital campaigns, endowment management services, plan giving, strategic solutions. We do a variety of publications, including vestry papers and the vestry resource guide. If you haven't already, please check out our website at episcopalfoundation.org for more information about ECF and our various programs. So without further ado, I will hand over things to Donald to have him introduce himself and kick us off this afternoon.
Well, welcome and thank you all for joining us on February 1st. My name is Donald Romanik. I am president of the Episcopal Church Foundation, and I have been in this position since 2005. But prior to that, I was very active at the parish and diocesan level in Connecticut and served on vestries and as wardens and finance chairs and budget chairs and a variety of things for over 20 years. My vestry service was challenging. It was frustrating at times, but I really feel that it helped shape my leadership style. And it has also helped me and others in our organization basically develop resources and tools that vestries can use in doing things, in doing God's holy work. I recently wrote an article for Vital Practices, and I just want to highlight 5 things that I think every vestry member should know, and then we can open it up to questions or comments. First of all, that it is holy and important work. A lot of people on vestries serve on boards of directors of local not-for-profits or run their own businesses. And while a parish is indeed a small business in a lot of respects, serving on the vestry is a lot more. I really firmly believe that the vestry, in partnership with the rector or priest in charge, is responsible for the missional, the strategic, the spiritual needs of the congregations. And it's not just about the budget or the buildings and grounds or the day-to-day operations. So keep that in mind. The other thing is that often people who serve on vestries are very active in a particular ministry. They may serve on the altar guild or be in the choir or active in outreach or mission or, very involved in buildings and grounds. When you join the vestry, you have to realize that you represent the entire community. You're not there representing a constituency. And while you'll still be passionate about your own particular ministry or program, when you serve on the vestry, you have to keep the needs of the entire faith community in mind. So that's sometimes difficult because people feel that they are elected to represent a particular constituency. The third is kind of what I say is don't leave your brain at the door. People come to the vestries with a variety of experiences, whether it's business, education, trades. One of the gifts you bring to the vestry is not only who you are, but what you know or what you do. So if you do have some information or knowledge about a particular issue, that's where it is to share. That's the time to share. At the same time, you have to realize that just because you might be a plumber and the vestry is discussing a major plumbing project, that other people also have a point of view and that you need to hear what they have to say. The other issue is use this experience to enhance your own spirituality. You will often hear in various things that ECF preaches and teaches is that you need to start every vestry meeting with some type of spiritual practice, whether it's Bible study, whether it's sharing your own faith journey. But vestry service is a wonderful opportunity to deepen your own personal spirituality as you give your time, talent, and treasure to the good of the community. And finally, you're not alone. You have each other. You have the rector, priest in charge, and any staff the parish may have. You have diocesan resources, and you have organizations like ECF and others who can help you on this journey. So I'll leave it at that. Those are just some introductory comments. But if you have any specific questions or comments or concerns, realizing that for a lot of parishes, people have just had their annual meeting or are just having their annual meeting and are just starting the cycle. So there may be new things coming up that people want to talk about. I also hear that, see on the list that there's somebody who is a new warden, the new senior warden in St. Bede's in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I've also served as a warden, and often people are very confused on what that role is. And when you often tell your non-Episcopal friends that I'm a warden in my church, they often confuse it with jail wardens. And actually, it's the same, comes from the same term. Wardens were primarily responsible for making sure that the doors to the church were unlocked, much the same way the wardens of jails are, although I think they're charged with making sure that the doors are locked rather than unlocked. But wardens have particular responsibilities, especially in the absence of a rector when there's a vacancy, and willing to talk a little bit about that if that's something people want to talk about. But floor is open.
Yes, thanks, Donald. And again, for those who are participating on the Zoom webinar, use the chat box to ask your questions, put in your comments. You can do so by pressing the chat button on the upper left-hand side of your screen. For those of you watching on Facebook Live, and I know there's a couple folks who are tuned in right now, you can put your comments in just below the broadcast in the comments field, and I will relay those to Donald. While we're waiting for folks to type their questions in, Donald, I was wondering, could you go in a little more about your point about representing the entire faith community? Often, vestries tend to have committees and different areas that they get assigned special responsibility, and I think sometimes this causes some confusion over what their role is, and when you say representing the entire congregation.
Yes, I mean, clearly, and especially in larger congregations or even smaller congregations, there are smaller committees or task forces, and a lot of parishes will have one vestry member assigned to each of these areas. What I'm saying is that, clearly you, as a member of a committee or a task force, you have a particular expertise or deeper knowledge of what's going on in that particular ministry. And that's good, and that's important. And it's important that vestry members, individual vestry members, know what's going on throughout the parish. What I mean about representing the entire community is in the event, for example, at budget time, that the vestry has to make a tough decision to cut a budget item or to eliminate a position, especially in those difficult times. That's when it's important that even though you may be a member of the choir or chair of the Buildings and Grounds Committee or the Outreach Committee, that when you are deliberating these tough decisions, you really have to open yourself up to the Spirit, hear the feedback of your colleagues, and make decisions based on the mission of the congregation, where you feel God is calling you to do, and how you put your resources, how you align those resources with your mission and God's call. It doesn't mean you don't develop expertise. It doesn't mean you don't get involved in something that you're passionate about. But in those difficult, especially those difficult decisions, you have to make sure you have the good of the whole.
Great, thanks, Donald. Paxton on Facebook, hoping I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Apologies if that is not the case, but he's asking, should there be a period of discernment for a member if a member of the congregation desires to serve on the vestry, and who should initiate that? Wondering if this might be the rector, the wardens, or the individual, him, herself, who's interested in serving on the vestry.
Absolutely. those of you who know me know that I am a big proponent of individual and community discernment. The classic joke is, the first time you show up at the parish, they welcome you to coffee hour. The second Sunday, they give you a pledge card. And the third Sunday, they invite you to join the vestry. I really think that vestry service, whether you're a large corporate-sized parish or a small family-sized parish, needs to be a discernment process. And I think, clearly it's the role, the rector has that role, but vestry members also have a responsibility for identifying the leadership of the parish. So it may be as simple as, you notice somebody who's been coming, they seem to be interested, they've been active in a particular program or ministry, and you say, listen, I'd love to have a cup of coffee with you and talk a little bit about what you're passionate about. And kind of, ask them why they come, why they stay, whether they'd like to know more about this place. And sometimes you do more listening than talking, because it's also the way how you present what vestry service is about. And that's why I think, people kind of often will say, oh, we need bodies on the vestry. Would you like to serve on a vestry? And we meet once a month and we talk about budgets and buildings and grounds, and there's no beginning, middle, or end, and no real agenda, and we meet for hours. Rather than saying, would you, you seem to be interested in this place, you have some gifts and talents, would you like to be part of an elected group of lay leaders who in partnership with the rector are figuring out what God is calling us to do and be as his congregation? We think you have some skills and abilities, and we'd like to talk to you more about that. So yes, I think the discernment, it needs to be appropriate in terms of length and intensity based on, and meet the needs of the individuals. But just asking them to join the vestry without some kind of knowledge or background is not good for the parish and not good for the individual. I think orientations for new vestry members are also helpful. We have resources available. We have the vestry resource guide, which I know a lot of you are familiar with. An opportunity for new vestry members to kind of figure out what it is they're supposed to be doing. But doing this cold, I think, does a disservice and kind of undermines the fundamental role of a vestry in the local faith community.
Great, thanks, Donald. Corrine has a couple of questions, but following up on this topic about the nomination and election process, she's wondering, what's the best approach with someone who strongly wants to be on the vestry again when they had served on it years ago and were disruptive? This is a person that is likely to self-nominate.
I think part of the issue is people, yes, first of all, I think while you want a diversity of opinion on a vestry, you don't want disruptive people on the vestry. You don't want rubber stamps, but you want people who are basically ready, willing, and able to kind of, comply with the norms of how you should run a vestry. I think often with people who are disruptive on vestries, it could indicate a variety of things. There are some people who are just disruptive people, and that is just a problem within the community. Some people are disruptive because they feel they have not identified a role. They feel they're not being listened to. They feel they're being ignored. And quite frankly, the vestry may not be the appropriate place for those people. What I would suggest with this disruptive member is maybe for the rector and the warden or another member of the vestry to sit down with this person, kind of talk about, saying, listen, this wasn't a very good experience for you or us. Let's talk about that. And if they're really passionate about something, maybe you fit them into another leadership or fellowship role in a particular ministry, in a particular program, rather than putting them back on the vestry. Now, people can always self-nominate. We are big proponents of a slate. And when the nominating chair is putting forward the slate, we said, nominations from the floor are open, but we feel that based on our needs, this is the best slate of individuals who can help lead us into the next phase of what God is calling us to do. But I think sometimes having a conversation, a loving, pastoral, but firm conversation with somebody who's been disruptive might be a very helpful thing. And if if they continue after that, they say, I don't care, I want to be on Vestry and I'll nominate myself. Obviously, you can't stop them, but you hope that the wider community will abide by the good graces and the good wisdom of the people who are putting forward the slate of nominees for the new Vestry.
Great, thanks, Donald. Karina had another question that actually gets back to the topic about committee representation. And her vestry has been assigning people to various quadrants, as she put it, to work and help support these areas in the congregation. But they also want to help raise up new leadership. And to do this, they wish to have some leadership training in order to help and train and support committee chairs. They're thinking that we can train ourselves by having vestry members present a leadership topic for about 15 minutes at each meeting every 2 months. Does this sound viable, or do you have any other suggestions?
I just need a little clarification. In terms of a leadership topic, is it basically a particular ministry, or a leadership topic being, effective leadership or collaborative leadership? I guess I need a little more clarification on that. Generally, I think the idea of people kind of sharing their own expertise or their own passions with the wider topics on leadership skills, I think that could be helpful. But probably rather than keeping it theoretical, maybe you have people saying, this has been my experience of leadership, and here are some of the skills I feel I have developed over the years, and here are some of my growing edges. You can also use this not only as an opportunity to kind of develop and have people talk about leadership, but also it's an opportunity for people to kind of share their stories. And it could also be also combined with maybe, I mentioned earlier, kind of sharing faith journeys. So for example, you may say, listen, I've been a small business person for 25 years. I've chaired the local Kiwanis Club, and now I'm on the vestry. And I've always thought that my leadership style was, kind of strong and decisive. But I'm learning from being with you all that a much more collaborative approach seems to make more sense. And as I stay connected with this community and figure out what God is calling me to do in this particular place, I'm really fortunate to have you all work with me as we continue to figure this out together. I mean, that's just an example of how these leadership topics could not only be helpful to talk about what effective leadership is, but also get to know your colleagues and share with each other your own personal journeys.
Great, thanks, Donald. Again, would invite everyone on the Zoom webinar to open up the chat box and put your questions or comments into the chat box. Or if you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand and I will try to move you over to a panelist and we can put you on camera and have you speak through Zoom. Also on Facebook Live, if you're there and you have any questions, please go ahead and put a comment in and put your question in that comment box and I will relay that to Donald. In the meantime, Donald, often there can be some confusion in terms of service as a warden, in terms of how that is distinguished from being on the vestry, just a vestry member itself, and what does it mean to be a senior or junior warden? Does the junior warden have to be the buildings and grounds representative? I wonder if you could speak a little bit about when you're called to specific ministries within the vestry itself.
Yes, and we have a very provocative question from Patrick Funston. Is the vestry the rector's boss? And I'll get to that in a moment, but I'll get to Brendan's question first. You know, some places have the tradition of, you know, the rector's warden and the people's warden, where the rector kind of appoints the rector's warden often, you know, and the people elect the people's warden. And I guess the theory being that the rector needs somebody that he or she can kind of trust to be his or her representative in the elected body, and the people need someone. I don't know if it's kind of like the House of Lords and the House of Commons. In other traditions, you know, the senior warden is kind of the senior warden, but the junior warden is always responsible for buildings and grounds. I think that is not necessarily the best approach. I think if you have somebody who's passionate about buildings and grounds, whether they're on the vestry or warden, they should be in charge of that. I think a lot depends on the culture of the congregation. I think a lot depends on the size of the congregation. But often, you know, the rector, the wardens, the treasurer, the clerk or secretary may comprise an executive committee. It may be the group of people that develop the agenda. It may be the group of people that are gathered in the event of an emergency or something that needs immediate attention. But I think a lot depends on the nature of the congregation, the traditions, the bylaws, and even the norms in the diocese. Is the vestry the rector's boss? No, the vestry is not the rector's boss. You know, clearly rectors, you know, rectors have canonical authority and canonical responsibility. I would say that the vestry is the rector's partner, as the rector is the vestry's partner. And together you have clearly delineated roles and responsibilities, but together you are jointly responsible for the missional, strategic, fiduciary, and spiritual aspects of the congregation. Now, clearly, because the rector does have canonical authority and he or she is the paid staff person, they do have some, they do have authority, they do have influence, they do have roles and responsibilities that, you know, on an ongoing basis. And under the canons, they have authority to kind of, for the use of the buildings and grounds. But I think in a well-functioning congregation, it really needs to be a partnership. There are times the rector has to assert his authority or her authority, and that's perfectly appropriate. But I think the idea of vestry saying, we are your boss, first of all, that's not true. It's unhealthy. The other thing that was, the other phenomenon that was not quite as obvious, but also quite as heinous was, well, if we don't like what the rector is doing, what we'll do is we'll just deny him or her the budget they're looking for to do what they want to do. I also think that's dangerous. Her holiness, I love it. The new rector has just started her third month at a parish. What would you do with your new vestry? I would take your new vestry on a retreat and spend that time getting to know each other and not do any vestry business. And it could be half-day retreat. It could be an overnight retreat. You can take everyone to the islands on a, you know. But the idea is that spend some time together, do some Bible study, do some prayer, do some faith sharing, do some wine and cheese, do some breakfast, do some coffee, and just get to know each other. Because it's amazing that, and make sure there is some element of food and beverage. I'm not necessarily saying it has to be wine, although that is the Episcopal tradition. But I think it's really important that people get a sense of you as a new rector, as someone who's there to work with them, walk alongside them. And I'm here to get to know you, and you're here to get to know me. So that's how I would spend the first session. And then kind of get a sense of, I also would spend some time with individual people, a cup of coffee, getting to know individual people, especially those people who are the perceived leaders of the vestry, and then figure out what the kind of nuts and bolts need to happen.
Great, thanks, Donald. We have just about 5-6 minutes left of our time here, so please do get your questions in if you have them. Put those into the chat box through Zoom or on the comment section if you're tuning in via Facebook Live. And Donald, I have another question for you about spiritual practices with the vestry. Oftentimes we hear from vestries that they say that the people are not comfortable with this aspect and that the vestry meeting should be just about business. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions for how to introduce spiritual practices to a vestry that is not used to doing that?
Well, you may not go around the room and say, okay, please, each person now will go around the room and tell me when you first accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior. That may not be the way you break the ice, especially in places like New England or Metro New York. That's why I think Bible study is probably the best way. And the African style Bible, it's like, you read the passage, what word or phrase jumps out at you. Start slow. Do something that is non-threatening. But I think part of it is like any spiritual practice, whether we do it individually or corporately, spiritual practices that seem a little, strained at first become more normalized each time we do it. And whether that's our own prayer life or centering prayer or doing the office, after a while it becomes more normalized. So start with something non-threatening, but I believe that every church meeting should start with prayer, whether it's finance or buildings and grounds or personnel. But vestries really need to be more intentional about spiritual practices. But be patient. People will come along.
Great, thank you. And another frequent topic that we hear from vestries is the meeting just goes on and on and on and on and on. Do you have any suggestions for people in terms of how to set an agenda that will not let the meeting go on for, say, 3 hours?
Yeah, we can do a whole thing on setting agenda. But first of all, I think any meeting beyond 2 hours is non-productive, especially if you're meeting at the end of a long day. I think 90-minute vestry meetings should be more the norm, and that includes the spiritual practice. First of all, a consent agenda is one way of shortening meetings. So if there's a report of the Buildings and Grounds Committee or the Budget Committee where there's really nothing to talk about, it's kind of a routine month, do that as a consent agenda item. I think you focus on kind of big picture strategic issues. The way you order the agenda, after spiritual practices, I think every vestry meeting should have some kind of big picture topic for open discussion. And maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's 15 minutes, and it may be something like, how can we be more engaged in our changing neighborhood? An opportunity that, not necessarily problem solving or resolving or bringing closure, but giving people an opportunity to kind of think beyond kind of the day-to-day stuff. With the consent agenda, people can always, move an item to a discussion item. But unless the budget is a big issue, especially early in the year, it usually isn't. People can read. Minutes should be a consent item. Any committee reports, budgets. So that's another way of kind of tightening the meeting. Because if you look at an agenda and I see budget as the top item, I'm going to think, well, budget's the most important thing to talk about, or I'm going to need to ask questions or talk about it because someone thinks it's important. I'm not sure why. It seems okay to me. So the structuring an agenda is critical.
Great, thanks, Donald. Well, we are just about out of time for our half-hour session together. That really flew past. Thank you to everyone who provided your questions and comments. It was great hearing from you. Please feel free to contact us at the Episcopal Church Foundation for any other questions that you may have or looking for other resources for your vestry. And before we go, I also want to encourage everyone to go straight to their email inbox, because in there will be a link to a survey. Please click on that and just take a couple of minutes of your time to provide your feedback about this Q&A session. We read through each and every single comment that we get and all of the data that we receive, and use this to plan our future webinars and Q&A sessions online. So thank you again, everyone, for taking time out of your schedules to be a part of this session this afternoon, and God bless and Godspeed in your ministry on the vestry.
Thank you all for joining us.